guys, welcome back to the Yes Means Yes podcast. This week we have special guests Emily Hamilton and Annaliese White, along with my coworker Amanda, and we're going to be discussing the intersections of religion and sexual assault. So just a reminder, my name is Faith Nomchef. I'm the victim advocate, outreach coordinator, and prevention educator with Rape Counselors. And Amanda is the victim advocate and outreach specialist. And I'm going to go ahead and let Emily and Annaliese kind of introduce themselves and kind of talk about what their role or background in Christian ministry has been.
Hey, I'm Emily. I grew up in the church, and I think for this discussion, it's important, and we'll talk, I plan to talk about it later on, but it's important to say that I grew up in the Baptist faith. I have a Baptist background. I have a degree from a Baptist seminary, a master's degree in ministry, and I'm currently pursuing a master's in social work. So my experience is kind of all over the place. But ministry has been my primary job experience.
Hey, my name's Annaliese. My main role in a church is definitely a little bit different. I more so just grew up. I've never really had a position of leadership. I am pursuing a career in nursing. I graduate soon, so I will be upfront and say that a lot of my views in this discussion will have an influence of medical. And I think that that's important to kind of say up front, because I think Christianity has a huge role in this, but so does that in my opinions.
Awesome. Okay, so we're actually going to jump right in. So I just kind of want a little bit more background in your experiences in ministry or in your churches or Christianity. Have you experienced any like sexual assault, rape, child sexual abuse in your time of working or being a member? I know Annaliese is one of our volunteers, so she's definitely experienced it like as a volunteer with us, but like just, I guess, in intersection with church.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, either one of you, whoever wants.
I'll just say I did. Oh, I'm sorry. I think my internet's been weird. I'll just say in my experience, I did go to seminary, which is mostly male. And since my time in seminary, 3 different pastors that I know personally, and 5 that I was familiar with and knew kind of on a acquaintance basis have been convicted of sexual assault or have had major sexual moral failure that has ruined their ministry and families. So I've never been a victim, thankfully, but I know the men who have done these horrible things. So I guess that's a little bit of a different viewpoint.
I was gonna say, I think the only experience that I've kind of seen with it, I've never firsthand interacted with someone who has suffered from a sexual assault in the church body, but I have spoken a little bit with some church members, and I've noticed almost like a lack of education with who gets assaulted, who it happens to, and kind of like the processes that precede the rape and kind of what happens afterwards and all of that.
Yeah, good. Okay, so going off of that, have you had any experience with like allegations or reporting in churches, or like just knowing of them, and how have you perceived them being handled or not handled, or like how church community members responded, just things like that?
I kind of think that that's a broad question, because I think that that's a lot specific to the church itself and the members within it. Some maybe more radical churches are going to handle it a little bit differently than maybe some that have, I guess, not so upfront of views and maybe handle it a little bit more like you and I would, whereas you may have some that might come about it as like, was it your fault? How did you do it? Where others may be a little bit more understanding. So I think that's a hard question to answer without specific personal experience with how it's handled, if that makes sense.
You personally have never like had any experience of like allegations or anything in a church body you've been a part of?
Not that I can think of specific to sexual assault.
I know that in one of the cases, a minister that I know was let go from a church and then moved to a new church. The new church that he went to called the old church, asking for references and background checks, and they said, oh, he's great at his job. He's a family man. He's got a wife. She's pregnant. She's awesome. So they accepted him for the new job. It was a very large church that he came from and a very large church that he was going to. It was not disclosed that he was let go. It was framed as he is looking for a change, looking for something new. And he gets to the church, serves there a while. I want to say he was there 8 or 10 years. And somebody watching security cameras saw him take a student into a room, and lo and behold, this had been going on for a long time. So when the court case opened up, there was an allegation from the previous church that came up again, and so that had not been disclosed. So a little bit of, I guess, interesting history for those of you who don't follow church politics, I guess. In early 2019, the Houston Chronicle, which is a major newspaper, released an article about widespread sexual assault within the church. And in the article, there were over 380 abusers reported and over 700 victims noted. And this was over about a 20-year time period, but it was localized in the Texas area, basically, a few other major churches. And the article in the Houston Chronicles listed churches. And of the churches, a majority were Baptist. So in 2019, Baptist Faith, the Southern Baptist Church, launched an initiative to address the issue. So to answer your question, Faith, there are lots of holes in the process. One hole being a background check does nothing if you've never been caught.
Yeah.
Or
so the whole we have to run background checks on everybody, that doesn't always work.
Right.
It helps and it's an important step, but it doesn't always work. Two of the accusers I know had never been accused of anything. But now they're both in jail, and so their background checks would have been clean. So there's a few kind of things that make the Baptist church more susceptible than other Protestant churches. We've known for a long time that this was an issue in Catholic churches, partially due to the privacy issue. Like everything that goes on between a person of faith and a priest is private. And so that creates an open door for things to happen that shouldn't happen. But in the Baptist church, there's really no specifications for a pastor. Each church kind of determines what they want to be their qualifications. But the Baptist faith as a whole doesn't say you have to do this, this, and this. Whereas in the Methodist church, the Presbyterian church, they do. They have standards up until that point, whether it's education or national ordination councils or whatever. The Baptist church, they qualify and ordain their own ministers. And there's no real governing body. The Southern Baptist Convention serves primarily to send missionaries. And so they don't serve as a governing body over the churches. They have no ruling power over a specific church. But in response to this 2019 article, the Baptist faith has made some changes to where if a pastor is accused of sexual allegations, it's investigated, and the church does not respond to the allegations, then the Southern Baptist Convention can now excommunicate them. And that's a really big change. It's a really big deal. And so this whole thing in 2019 caused a huge stink in the Baptist faith, but also created conversations across lots of Christian avenues. So Going back to the original question, what's been my experience with accusations? I would say a lot of times what I see in the church has been youth pastors or pastors, older men and younger females. And I think a lot of times the female is groomed in a way that they don't think they need to report anything. They don't understand that it's a problem. They truly believe a lot of times that these men are going to leave their wives for them. And they don't know that what has happened to them is wrong until much later. And then ministers move a lot. And so by the time a girl goes, oh, wait, this thing happened to me when I was 15 and I'm not really sure that was right. When she's 19 or 20 and she's realizing that was not okay, it's almost kind of quote unquote too late. It's not too late. We know it's not too late, but in their mind, it is, the mandated reporting piece, the fact that ministers are mandated reporters is not well known. It's not discussed in ministry circles. It's not something that you're taught in seminary. It's not, it's just not discussed. It's just, if you don't know, you just don't know. And so I think sometimes pastors are told things and they don't know what to do with the information.
Do you think that some of this too of I guess lack of reporting also has to do with Christians wanting to keep a perfect outward appearance, like this doesn't happen within our church body?
I think so, yeah. I think in the story I told earlier, the church that the guy had been dismissed from, I think they were so well known and so well respected that they didn't want it out.
Yeah. Ask a question on that one too. So do you think that if it had been another crime, like he had done some sort of embezzlement or fraud or anything, do you think that would have come up? Or do you think it was because it was a sexual assault allegation that they didn't want to disclose it?
It's really hard to say because I know pastors who were secretly let go for financial reasons too.
Okay.
This is it's crazy that we function this way. And I think in a lot of ways, social workers do too, but we care so much about people that we want to protect them. And so we think if we just let him go, he gets away from this situation, he heals his family, then it'll all disappear.
Yeah.
And so I think we don't take sexual assault seriously enough in a lot of cases. So yeah, I don't really know. It's probably a lot easier to disclose a different kind of moral failure than it is sexual assault.
Sexual anything in the church body is heightened, no matter if it's intentional, accidental, and I don't really know how it would be accidental, but how if it was rape or whatever, that's just heightened compared to anything else you can do.
Oh yeah.
Unless the minister were to come out as LGBTQ, then that would be an easy no, we're done, you're out. That would, that's an easy, that one seems to be there's the line,
Yeah. Which brings in just another intersection, of course. But yeah, and go ahead. I was
you go.
Love Zoom. Go ahead, Amanda.
I think also that, they don't want it to get out because people do not want their church to be affected and have that stigma to it, because it would hurt their body size, but it would also hurt their financial givings as well if that was associated with their church.
That's a very selfish reason not to report it.
Right.
Now I was going to say, so you mentioned how ministers move a lot. So I don't know how much anyone listening knows about sex offender registries. To get a job in a state, they only check that state. So you could have a sex offender, be on a sex offender list in another state, but they're not going to check it. I mean, they could, but they're only required to do the state you work in, at least for Alabama. So that has been something that I've seen before. Someone did a check, because they were possibly worried. And then they were like, nothing came up. And they're like, okay, go check other states. And then they had like several states come up. But if they hadn't like gone the extra mile to do that, they would never have seen that.
That's a great point, Faith, because I encourage churches all the time. Like, part of my job is dealing with helping churches deal with these issues, especially like hiring and equipping volunteers and that kind of thing. And so for like $6 more than the basic background check, you can do a national sex offender registry check. Like, literally the basic is like $12 and the national is like $20. I mean, it's like no different.
Yeah.
But the church just goes, oh, background check, we check the box. Like, let's just get the cheap one because all I need is the
state.
Do you think that's because there's some amount of like a basis of trust within the church body? Like, oh, he's a minister, why do I need to pay the extra $6 or whatever to get that extra background check?
I think there's a good bit of, like you said, trust. They just trust that ministers are good people. But I also think there's a good bit of just being naive.
Yeah.
They just kind of think it's not going to happen here,
Right.
like small town Alabama, that's not going to happen to us, but it has.
Does.
It's happened here. It's happened here in Gadsden where I serve,
I also think too, another problem is I think people are very limited, like you were talking about how they called the last church. I think because you were saying that they were never proved to have done anything, it was, word against word, that I think whenever someone calls to get a background check from someone, I think and I may be wrong, but I think it's illegal to actually like say a lot of bad things about them. I think it's very pretty much, would you hire this person? Yes or no. And it has to be more vague, I think. And so when you have that, you're not really able to connect all the dots with what's happening. You just kind of have to read between the lines. And I think within the church or with anyone, they've already met the person. So most of the time they've already kind of had their opinion about what they thought of that person. So, and nobody wants to believe that, a pastor would do anything wrong. And so you have that part to work, deal with too. So it's not, I think it's just all the way around, just not a good situation when you're, you just have to put your trust. And, we hear that a lot in the Christian faith, you have to have trust in people and you have to forgive. And so it's almost like that line of, okay, I'm supposed to forgive, but what you did was really awful. And so I think it's conflicting with a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was great. I'm going to move on to the next question. So just throughout like our work with victims, a study that we did, we've really, and just society in general, we've come to this seeing over and over again, you see victims not reporting because they're afraid they won't be believed. They're afraid that people are going to dismiss them and just not trust that what they said is true. Do you think that just the history of the church hiding or handling allegations internally, do you think that that could be an impact that could keep victims for unreporting in fear that their church would find out, or just fear that they would not be believed or untrusted?
I think victim blaming is a huge issue in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should have never started texting him, or you should have never stayed late after that event, or you should, I think that fear of not being understood or heard is always an issue. I do think in my experience, in the cases that I know, I think that genuinely all of them that I know are children or minors. And I think that genuinely they didn't know there was a problem.
Okay.
And going off of that, with it happen with children, I think, as parents, when we're in the church and, just say, for instance, you have a youth group we're encouraging our child to go. Why, go. And even though that child might have experienced something and hasn't told you about that experience, but they're kind of, I guess, kind of disengaged and I don't really want to go, as parents, I can see how it could easily be done as, well, why wouldn't you want to go? This is a church function. That person is a wonderful person. He's in the church and he does this and he, takes you guys to do this and buys you ice creams and does, like, they do all this extra stuff. And as parents or guardians, you can view that as, oh, there's a super nice person that really cares and is trying to show the faith. And even though, your child might be like, I really don't want to go, a parent might be like, well, it's because, they just don't want to go to this church thing, or they would just rather go stay home and play Xbox or go hang out with their friends. When I think parents also and guardians need to be aware of those signs and really paying attention to their children and how they respond to these people. But I think people get so caught up on, well, they're a good person, they're with the church. So you don't focus or pay attention to those signs that you normally would. And then they're kind of forced to go off with these people. And then they come back a year later and they say, well, so-and-so did this to me. And then it's like, well, I didn't know. Well, so I think that is hard too.
You put on blinders, I think.
Yes.
I mean, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Faith.
I was going to say, I want to believe that if someone is saying that they're practicing the same faith that I am, that they're also practicing kind of like the same moral, like we're compatibly moral. So I know I would never do that. So I want to think that they wouldn't. But yeah, that was a good point, Amanda.
I had 2 points that I wanted to make off of that. My first one is kind of bumps off of the last question too. Just saying that you're a Christian means nothing.
Yeah.
That's strictly a title. Your actions are what matters. Being a Christian doesn't make you inherently a good person. You should be a good person. Jesus should be within you, and that helps you be a good person, and that's great. But you can't let someone hide behind this facade of being a Christian and you just automatically have so much trust in them. Like, oh, they're a Christian, they're great. Like, they go to church, they read their Bible. I mean, like, I've experienced that even with, like, dating. Christian guys can be awful. You think, oh, he's a Christian, he's great, this is fabulous. And next thing you know, like, he's awful.
Yeah.
So, like, Christianity only takes you, like, so far with that word. Like, that's merely, like, that's what it is, it's a word. And then my second point was, I think with kids, like, my age, so I'm 21. So, like, I can go to bars, I can go drink, do whatever. I think that you can get almost like a judginess from the church. Were you drinking? What were you wearing? Were you out partying? You're in college. Did this happen to you? And it's just boom, 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 boom. Whereas, like, with the kids, I think it can be a little bit different than whereas my age, the church body can be like, well, what did you do that caused this? Where in reality, I wasn't doing anything.
You're a college student. Yeah. That's a really good point. Because I mean, I definitely, like I said, the study we did was on college stage students. So that completely makes sense. That being a barrier and having that extra, like, drinking and just adding to it. Yeah.
Right. Because then you're thinking, like, so it's never happened to me, but if it had and I had to go up, I would be thinking in my head, like, are they going to think that I was doing this or that, or like what would they think that I was doing? I would know that it wasn't my fault, that I hadn't done anything, but those would be fears in my head of, they're going to ask me this, they're going to blame this, they're going to do this, they're going to ask me all of these questions, and I'm not mentally ready to answer those questions.
Right.
So
I think too, like, growing up in church and particularly in youth group, you talk about sex one time a year in February, and that's it. And what you're taught is typically they bring in a speaker or the pastor does it, or like, I remember my church when I was in high school was like really edgy because there was a couple in the church who had gotten pregnant outside of marriage, and so they got to come and like do the purity talk or whatever. But pretty much the only message in traditional church settings, the only message you get about sex is that it's wrong and it's bad, and if you do it, you're dirty.
Yes.
And so for whatever reason, even when, and I'll say from like experience in ministry, like I've had students, because I work with college students, they get married all the time. So even in my experience, like I've had girls in my ministry get married and then come to me after the marriage and say, I can't get past the idea that having sex with my husband is wrong. And something about this makes me feel like I'm sinful and I'm dirty. And so I think unintentionally, because of lack of ability to, or lack of, maybe not ability, but knowledge, maybe is a good word. Lack of knowledge of how to educate about sex within the church causes victims to feel like they're bad.
Yeah, because the state of Alabama is still doing focus on abstinence. Like it's not even within just the church, which they're probably like more church than schools. But yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I know a guy who's a minister who goes in to churches and teaches like abstinence as like sex prevention.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like this is a whole different soapbox, and you probably don't want to go there, but to skip over the fact that God created sex skips over a huge chunk of theology. I mean, when you get into the book of Revelation, we are described as the church, and Christ is the groom, and we, the church, as are the bride. Mm-hmm. And then the book of Hosea is a parallel to that. And Hosea describes God pursuing Israel the same way that a husband would take his wife off into the woods and have sex with her. So if we paint sex as only bad and ugly and dirty, then we are skipping over how much Christ loves us and has given himself to us and for us. And so not only are we missing like huge pieces of who God is and what that relationship is meant to be, we're setting victims up and setting students up and teenagers up for failure in the future. I mean, we're pushing men, and not that it's an only male problem, but we're pushing men further into pornography addiction. We're making women ashamed to be with their own husbands, and above all those things, we're making sexual assault victims feel like they're the dirty, sinful, gross person, and that's not okay.
Well, and if we're not teaching even just about healthy sexuality in general, how are they supposed to understand consent when it does come to that time? And if we're being, I mean, it's no lie that honestly, I'm pretty sure, 40% of teens are having sex. And that number's probably gone up since then. But realistically, they're having sex. So it's better to teach them how to healthily have sex than to get in situations where like they don't know to ask for consent, or they're scared to talk to their partner about their bodies, and then it becomes a very cloudy situation or sexual assault.
That's my whole issue. I was gonna say that's my whole issue with the abstinence as your form of like birth control. I think it's fabulous if you wait until marriage to have sex, but that's not the reality that we live in. One, because we have a whole bunch of people that don't share these same views, and two, when you do get married, it's also setting yourself up to get pregnant, and maybe you're not financially stable. You don't have the resources in which to prevent that, to allow yourself to better plan for the future. But that's like another soapbox of.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
It's also using guilt to keep people from like, oh, well, you're bringing like the whole, you bring every partner before into your marriage. So like every partner you have makes you more dirty for your husband. This is a personal story that I got permission to share from a friend. She would wear a purity ring, and then she was raped. After she was raped, she could not look at her purity ring because it just made her panic, because she was thinking that, I'm not pure anymore. So she had to take off her purity ring. And I just would hate
not fair
a culture that has anyone feel that way.
And I think too is, like talking about abstinence stuff, sex is it's very natural. I mean, it's a natural thing that our bodies, I guess you would even say it needs. Mm-hmm. I guess you could say, it's just a very natural feeling. So even at a young age, I think it's 12 is when, you know, you start having fantasies, like your own body responds. Even when you're not mentally there, your body responds before your brain does. So it is a very natural thing. And so it's almost like a fight between your body and something that's natural, because you are being told it's a dirty thing. And then people, when things happen, it's brought bad, I guess, or said it's bad and it's dirty. And then, you know, whenever certain people have that feeling that it is dirty, then that's when you have people going to porn and other things, because it is such a natural thing that you just can't turn it on and off. Like, it's a natural thing. So that's, you know, and if you have it where, you know, people view it as dirty, I think that can cause a lot of problems within relationships, because your view is not the same about it. And like you're saying, in the church, if you're not even being taught in church how it's natural and how sex is not a bad thing, then it's going to cause problems for your future if you're not educated about it correctly.
I feel like as a society, or like not a society, but as like a church body, we put so much emphasis on sexual sin, like so much more emphasis on that sin as compared to other sins, like smaller things, or smaller, like ranking sins. Like, because God basically says in his eyes, sin is sin, sin is sin. But we put so much into sexual sin that there are, and I will call them children because they're 19-year-olds, 18, 19-year-olds getting married because they don't want to wait to have sex, and they'd rather go into a loveless, sad marriage for the rest of their lives rather than have sex outside of marriage. Or get divorced later. And I just, could not preach about that enough, but yeah. So I'm actually going to skip around a little bit because I felt like we did answer like a couple as we went along, which is great. But just talking about like the traditional female roles that you see in the Bible, do you guys think that these could be harmful? Could they be like used as justification for like submission to men? And if so, like in what ways?
I see that on the notes you have a specific Bible verse. Are you referring just to that one?
Literally just like any Bible verse or anything in the whatever. I guess I should have prefaced this entire thing by speaking on the fact that all four of us are Christians, and we are only speaking to Christianity because that is what we know. So if you've gotten this far and you're confused, we're going off of the Christian Bible. But yeah, I did have one that I guess I'll read that I thought was interesting. So it's Ephesians 5:22 through 24. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church, the body of which he is the Savior. Just as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be in everything to their husbands.
I think with like this specific verse, I think that people can kind of twist it, but I think that you also kind of need to kind of look at it from like the perspective that like you're supposed to, I guess, because like submitting doesn't necessarily mean like cowering in a corner. You think of like Christ as like the head of the church. He's trying to do what's best for you. He doesn't have any poor intentions, as should your husband in that kind of situation. And it's kind of, I guess, remembering like roles, almost like your own dynamics of your relationship, and thinking that like the husband is the head of the household. He's the one that's there to protect you and kind of shield you from what is going on around you. And the wife is more, I kind of think as like the dad is like the protector and the mom is like the lover, if that makes sense. Whereas like she's there to like nurture the kids and the dad's there to like protect them. And of course, like you can have some role reversal and everything, but this verse is not saying, you know, honey, let's go have sex in the bedroom, and like she doesn't want to, but she has to submit. Like there's respect and there's love in that, and it's not this power, do as I say kind of thing. Like it's balanced, but you have like your roles, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes one of the biggest problems is how people take verses from the Bible, and depending on where they are at that time, they can use that verse to how it suits them for the situation that they're in. So you may have someone that says, you know, I want to have sex. Just say a male says, I want to have sex. And the wife says, I'm tired. I don't want to do that. You know, that husband, he can turn around and say, but you are to submit to me. You are to, you know, I'm the head of the household. So they use that almost, they use the verse to how
justify
what they're saying or what they're doing. And that in itself is wrong. So it's like you can take, and I think that is a problem with some people that are Christians. We don't want to think that way, but they will take a verse and they will justify it to what is best for them at that moment of time for what's going on, to say, well, this is what the Bible said. Well, then that other person, it's almost like that whole, when you're sitting at a traffic light and you see an accident, how it happens. One person sees it one way and the other person sees it the other way. The accident did happen, but it's how they are viewing it at that time and how they're using it to their advantage. Because the person that hit the other person is not going to say, well, I hit you, like. So I think that too is they just, how people read certain verses, they take it like the whole submitting to your husband part, and the man is the man of the household, so the woman is supposed to just cook and clean. You know, like these are things that we hear now. And so, yeah, I think that can also be a problem.
I remember a while. Oh wait, what were you gonna say?
You can go ahead.
This is a little short little thing. I remember when I was in youth group. I don't even remember what we were studying, but I just remember that we were talking about how the Bible uses fear often. Like you should fear Christ in that context, and people think like, well, why am I fearing him? I shouldn't fear him. But back then that kind of translated to like respect. So you should respect Christ. And so I think if you go in and you read that verse and you don't understand like the true meanings behind the words, it is very, very easy to misinterpret it as something that it's not saying.
I just wanted to make 2 notes about that specific passage, and then I guess a little bit of personal experience with that. First, the passage that you read, it's Ephesians 5:22 through 24. And what's interesting is that's typically what we read. That's typically what we hear quoted. But if you continue reading in verse 25, so it says, wives, submit to your husbands as the head. And then it says in verse 25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So loving your wife the same way that Christ loved the church is a way harder thing to do than submit. Submitting is significantly easier when you consider everything that Christ did for the church. Like Christ, knowing that he was equal with God, chose to become like a man and came to earth, lived as a man on earth, where he experienced the things that we experience. He had a friend die. He was hungry. He had his family turn away from him when he started his ministry. Like he experienced a lot of heartache here on earth, and then he died. And ultimately he died. And the night before he died, he's laying in the garden praying, begging God, please let there be another way. So Jesus, what Jesus did and how Jesus served the church was not in any way easy. So when you look at what the men are called to do in this passage that culture skips, there's a huge issue there. And I think that you're right, Faith. I think in a lot of fundamentalist circles, women are told, submit, do what he says when he says it, no matter what. But that's not what the passage says at all. And secondly, I just wanted to mention contextually, Ephesians is written to the church at Ephesus, and Ephesus was the center there was a huge temple to a goddess, Artemis, there. And Artemis was the goddess of fertility. So if you can imagine what worship to a fertility goddess would be like, it kind of gives you context into why Paul would need to say, let's just talk for a minute about what marriage is like and what that actually means. So a lot of Paul's teachings, which is a lot of what you read in the New Testament, are specific to an area. They're what you call descriptive. They're describing a thing rather than prescriptive, meaning giving instructions. So Paul does give a lot of instructions, prescriptive, prescribing things, but it's interpreted in that context. And I'm not saying that the Bible is open to 1,000 different interpretations. I think that the Bible means one thing, and none of us on earth know what it means. Like, let's just say, like, we all have our ideas. That's why there's 1,000 different denominations. We all have our ideas of what we think it means. And I have my ideas, and I know why that's my idea. But the Bible doesn't mean something different to me and something different to Faith and something. So it means one thing, and we have to pray for the wisdom to interpret it. But with all that said, I will say, growing up in the church, I am a leader. Like, I am not passive. I am not quiet. I am not quiet. I am not. I'm not in any way submissive. That word seems. It does seem oppressive, I guess. And I went to seminary. That's a man's world. And like, no man can lead me. Like, I don't need a spiritual leader. Like, I have a degree in Bible, like, that kind of, and I tended, my whole life, really, I tended to date guys that were just kind of okay with that. Just kind of like, oh, she's like kind of just going to do her thing and I'll just follow her around. And it just like didn't work. It just, like, every relationship I was ever in ended up a disaster. And then, like, the man that I'm married to now pursued me, and it was difficult. Like, it was difficult for me to say, okay, I'm open to leadership. Like, I'm open to you showing me, like, what you think is best for our family, or what you think. And our roles don't fit what you would say as, okay, he's the head and she's submissive. But in our home, in our parenting, in our prayer life, in our bill paying, in our, like, whatever it is, he does with me. However, I don't feel oppressed. I don't even really feel submissive, because I respect him so much that I want that. And so I think that the way we communicate is almost outdated. Like, we talk about submission and we talk about headship, and these words don't mean anything anymore. Like, that, I mean, you tell a teenager, well, there should be male headship in your home. What does that mean? Like, they have no idea.
That's true.
So,
Yeah, it has definitely changed. So, like, that could be so different than, yeah.
well, and I think another thing is, like, Christianity is in no way meant to be oppressive. And I think what makes Christianity different and special from other religions is that it's not, when you read the scripture, and when you pursue a relationship with Christ, it is not works-based. I think our culture, the Southern culture, the Bible Belt culture, and even a lot of our church cultures make it performance-based. If you do these things, including never have sex and never talk about sex, then you are a good Christian. But that's not what Christianity is. And most other major religions are works-based. If you do these things, then you get this reward. And that's not how Christianity is supposed to function when you read the text.
Right, because, the only person that's perfect is God. We are not perfect. We are not built to be perfect. And so we, that's why Jesus forgives us for our sins. And so I think, like you were saying, if you do this and you do this and you abide by this, then that's a great Christian. But God loves those people just as much as he loves those that screw up on a daily basis. That's why we have Jesus. That's why he's here for us. That's why we put our knees to the floor every night and say, God, I'm sorry, I messed up again. But the next day I'm going to try to do better, and he forgives you for that.
Okay, that was good. Okay, so I think we've really covered everything else. I guess the last question that I have just kind of focuses on like the Church Too movement. This has really kind of gone off of the Me Too movement. Do you guys know what it is? Do you have any thoughts on it? I just thought it was interesting to bring it up because I think it's kind of really cool that we have like a specific one just for like church members.
I had personally never heard of it before. I looked it up a little bit before this, but I had never heard of it before.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it.
I was surprised when I looked it up that it started in 2018, which that surprises me, knowing what I know about recent church history, that the kind of uprising started in 2019. So I wonder if just personally, I was just curious if the Houston Chronicles article that started the current kind of trend to address the issue was partly because of the Church Too movement. Like, I was just curious. I don't know that we'll ever know the answer to that, but
Yeah, I don't know either, but I mean, it's very possible. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Church Too movement is basically like a little like separate like subsection of the Me Too movement, in which individuals of churches talk about their sexual assault or harassment or like anything like that happened within a church context, or how maybe they expressed injustice or they were failed by their religion. And I guess it's just kind of like a collective community just to be like, you're not alone, this happened to me too. First of all, I love this woman. I don't know if you guys know who Rachel Den Hollander is. She was the first woman to publicly come out about Larry Nassar. And I read her entire book, and honestly, I am like so in awe of how courageous and stuff she is. But this is probably me like giving too much weight to that, but I could honestly see her speaking at his trial, kind of getting, because like I felt like she had such an impact, and she spoke in her book so much about how even though she was part of a religion that didn't really like want to talk about it, she would go out of the way to make sure that sexual assault survivors and abuse was not being happened in her church. And she even ended up leaving churches and stuff. That was like a huge advocate point for her. And I don't know, anyone who has not read her book, it's What Is a Girl Worth? Read it. It's amazing. But I felt like she had a really good insight on it, and kind of like as a church member, but also a sexual assault survivor. But yeah, I think she's amazing. So that's my soapbox on her.
Do you have the book with you?
I have it on my Kindle.
Okay.
But I can.
And what was it called again?
What Is a Girl Worth?
What Is a Girl Worth? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, such a good book. But yeah. So you guys have any different thoughts on that? I guess I thought it was cool that it gave people at both the intersection of religion and sexual assault a place to just talk and to feel less alone, and like they have those survivors with that in common with them.
Well, I kind of feel like that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people find their voice. As advocates, as social workers, as anyone that's out in the helping community, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people find that voice so they don't feel alone, and to know that there's other people out there. And all it takes is one person to speak out that will encourage someone else, that will touch that person in a different way of, oh, they came out, they talked about this. And, you know, people like her are helping those that have been in the church or have been sexually assaulted be able to say, okay, there are other people like me. This is not in my imagination. This is something that happens a lot. This is something common. And so I feel like that's what we're here. That's why we're doing this video. We're just trying to help anyone that might hear this and say, you know what, that's going to help me, give me my voice. This is going to help me talk about it. This is going to encourage me to go talk to whoever it may be, a guardian or anyone, a place, I mean, anybody. So I feel like that's why any kind of movement is so important, because you're helping people find their voice. And if sometimes it just takes some people a long time to get the courage to speak on their own. And then that's why God invented wonderful people like us and hearts like us, or anyone that's in the helping community, in order for them to be able to speak out and help them.
I love that.
In 2020, there's really no excuse for the church to not know how to talk about sex. We have got to do better. Like,
yes.
I've traveled all over the state of Alabama begging youth pastors and teaching them and equipping them for how to do better. If we don't talk about sex, then we're missing major opportunities to invest in the lives of hurting people and broken people. We have the suicide rate among LGBTQ teens is outrageous, because in a lot of places they have nowhere to go. Women who struggle with infertility are all alone because that's a sexual thing and you can't talk about it. And rape victims don't have a place to say or feel afraid to say what has happened, because they feel the guilt and the shame all on themselves. And Christians that are listening to this, I'm begging you, I'm asking you, in whatever format you are involved in your local church, do better.
I like that. Unless anyone has any comments, I think we might end on that. Anyone else? Any other points you wanted to make?
Nicely said.
In the words of Emily Hamilton, do better. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this was an amazing discussion. I think it was like an hour, but whatever. I enjoyed it, and I think we made some really good points and talked about some stuff that people don't want to talk about, but that's what we're here for. Thank you, Annaliese, and thank you, Emily, so much for joining us and talking today. We really appreciate your time and your opinions, and thank you for anyone who's listening.
Thanks, Faye.